Welcome back to Burnout Break Room, the podcast that is like a break room, but helpful, where we look at burnout through a realistic lens, talk about ways to take a break from the grind, and spill the tea. I'm Caitlin Truhella, creativity coach and speaker.
And I'm Lyndie Larimore, licensed therapist, certified career coach, and consultant.
We are your hosts, and thank you for joining us here in the Burnout Break Room. Welcome, welcome, Lyndie. It is so good to see you here again in the break room. How are you today?
I am pretty great, actually. Yeah, I don't have too many complaints. It's kind of the summer is wrapping up. It's been beautiful in my part of the world. I've been able to enjoy some beautiful music and concerts and had some time off and feeling restored.
Mm,
How about you?
love to hear it. Color me restored as well
Hmm.
because it's funny to see like how the transitions of like one season into another happen in the desert because I love storms and especially like thunder and lightning storms. Oh my gosh, like that. Honestly, that's probably one of the reasons why I love vacationing to super cloudy places. That and having to deal with the prospect of getting sunburnt in the shade. But these thunder and lightning storms out here are something else.
Mm,
There's so much energy, packed into it. Like it's so powerful, feeling that change in the air, like literally feeling the electricity in the air. That, oh my gosh, that is so restorative to me. And
mm,
it's over the past couple of days, we've had multiple, so it's
mm.
just been wonderful.
Oh, that's exciting. That's exciting. It's nice I feel like thunderstorms can feel very magical sometimes, and it's nice to have that experience. As a musician, there's something about studying music that takes the magic right out of music. And for the
Mm.
first time in a lot of years, I feel like I attended a concert and I felt the magic again, and it was really nice. I was like, finally, like I felt like, like when you're a teenager and
Mm.
it's like music is magical. So it was really nice to have that experience and not feel like a jaded, old musician, which I am, don't get me wrong, but I didn't feel like one for a second.
That is so special. And yeah, I know exactly what you're talking about in terms of like reconnecting with the magic or the circumstance of it all. Because
Mhm.
yeah, when you study something for so long and you're, embroiled in the midst of it, literally like cooking in the soup, it's hard to see the forest for the trees and really be able to step back and, witness the awe of it.
Mhm.
And honestly, like especially I feel like when it comes to performance as well, it's one thing to be in the community, be in the moment like as it's happening, but obviously until we perfect teleportation, you can't, experience it like as the audience does to see everything like come together. And I've I think I mentioned this in a previous podcast as episodes as well, but having the same experience like coming out of, getting my literature degree, like, okay, this was all really fun. I love literature and learning all about it and the diving headfirst into the technical aspects of writing. Now I have to figure out what I like.
Mhm. Mhm. Just zaps all the joy out of it. Just zaps all the joy. Or for me, it was like, I really like this piece of music, and I feel like I'm not allowed to anymore. It's not complicated enough, or it's too good sounding. Like it should sound very complicated and a little nerve rattling, or else it's not good enough music. And so I just fully embraced a piece that I used to love and felt judged for loving for years. And then I was just like, nope, I'm going to love it and I'm going to have fun listening to it. So everyone can go
Kick
fly a
rocks.
kite. Thank you.
Hmm.
Yes. That.
I love it. The funniest thing too is I'm almost exclusively a Spotify user when it comes to music, but the funniest thing about getting my Spotify Wrapped at the end of basically every year is seeing that I almost can't say it. The music that I primarily listen to is between almost exclusively like three genres.
Hmm.
It's either classical music,
Hmm.
like very, very highbrow, right?
Mm.
And then like maybe some chill lo-fi, like instrumental jazz to have on like when I'm, studying or working in the background. And then like I don't even know if it has an official genre name, but it's like lowbrow comedy songs, like everything from Bo Burnham, and please don't anybody come at me for calling Bo Burnham lowbrow. But also like my recent favorite, and for all my TikTok folks out there, the OTC, especially the half horse, half man song.
Oh, I need to learn more about this. I
It
will
is
have to
absolute
be
nonsense.
curious. And I've never seen you laugh so hard, so it must be amazing.
It brings me so much joy. And like, yeah, when in terms of music and what is considered like, what is indicative of good taste, yeah, I really don't give a shit what it means like to other people that I like this music. It brings me joy.
Hmm. Yeah, exactly. Well, I'm no longer of the age where I care what people think of my music taste.
Hmm.
If I like it, I like it.
Yes. And for heaven's sakes, like for all of the time that we spend masking and not talking about like our real experiences and, real thoughts and real joys, yeah, we absolutely can revel in what we do enjoy.
Speaking of masking, have you had the experience, Caitlin, where you're in a workplace, maybe not even in a workplace, but in a situation where there are people around you who are not masking in a way that seems kind of baffling that they could kind of get away with not masking with the amount of energy required to mask?
Oh, absolutely. And even in all of those pieces that you're throwing down, like sick raps.
Emphasis on sick.
Yes, I'm catching every single one of them because the funniest part about all of this is that I sincerely wish so many of my coworkers were better at masking
Mm.
because it's at least in my experience, and maybe you've had different experience, Lindy, but the majority of the time, the people that I come across that clearly don't actively mask in these spaces are on the more mediocre side, and maybe in this situation masking would be actually encouraged.
Mm. 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 Say more.
To have the confidence of a mediocre white man. Hmm. Hmm.
Oh, what would I give? What would I
Mm.
give to be able to walk in a room, do whatever you want, or not do whatever you want, and receive so much praise?
Hmm.
Yeah. So in my experience, I often see this go down in kind of the overly educated spaces, whatever that is, whether it's a medical degree, psychiatry, academia. There's this whole myth out there that I really want to debunk right now that the higher the education, the more shenanigans you should be allowed to engage in. And I don't mean necessarily like bad behavior, which is absolutely a thing that happens, but I'm talking more
Mm-hmm.
about just like being rude, not having people skills, not doing your paperwork, somehow thinking that your degree keeps you from having to do paperwork and somehow means that someone else should be doing it for you.
Mm-hmm.
And then for people to be like, oh, well, you know their type. You know about them. And I no, I don't. Enlighten me. What does this mean?
Yes, please explain it. Please explain to me how an executive that makes six figures plus does not know how to open an attachment and somehow that is now my responsibility.
Yes. Yes. And here's another thing. Here's a form of ableism that I want to call out in the
Mm-hmm.
workplace. And I had a client talk to me about this the other day, and they were like, I'd feel so bad saying this, this feels wrong or like disrespectful, but we were able to recognize, no, this is ableism. The amount of times I've heard someone say to me, oh, well, that's just because they're on the spectrum to describe bad behavior,
Mm,
disrespectful behavior. That,
mm-mm,
friends, is ableism because
mm-hmm,
the implication there is they are incapable of being respectful because they are on the spectrum.
mm-hmm,
I've met some people on the spectrum who are wildly respectful, who are
mm-hmm,
kind, who are thoughtful, who do their job.
mm-hmm,
So I just want to call out the ableism that is because they have blank, some form of neurodiversity, some form of mental health diagnosis, maybe a recognized disability, that it means that they automatically don't have to be held to standards of appropriate work behavior. I call that ableism.
mm-hmm. And it most absolutely is. And honestly, I would take it a step further, Lindy, because in addition to forming that as an excuse for disrespectful behavior, which I know there have been so many studies on even just how incivility in the workplace can affect people's team morale, individual morale, and individual mental health as well. It also goes even farther to perpetuate stereotypes that people with different mental conditions are all incapable of being civil or respectful people. And that's just not true.
Bingo. Exactly. And I want to call out a very specific version of this. So I've worked in spaces where there are folks who, again, many different kinds of degrees, many different levels of education, and the folks who are held to the lowest standards of work appropriate behavior are often the folks who are paid the most and are the most, say, educated or have the most power.
Hmm.
The folks, in my experience, who are held to the highest standards are often the people who are paid the least. And specifically in mental health spaces, oftentimes people who are hired because of their lived experience, as soon as they have lived experience, I don't know how to say this, like as soon as they say, model, I'm struggling right now. I'm experiencing some
Hmm.
anxiety. I'm going to go use this coping skill. I'm going to go take, practice self-care, do their job as someone who has lived experience. Part of that's modeling and advocacy to then be discriminated against because they have lived experience and have talked about it. But the folks, that are higher up who are just behaving badly are
Hmm.
then defended and explained away as like, well, we're not going to actually address that because, oh, that's just so and so. They're on the spectrum. So that's just their behavior.
Right. The if I can use a piece of media to kind of illustrate my understanding of what you're talking about, Lindy, is I think of the original episodes of Shark Tank. And to Now, obviously, in this circumstance, like these are individual investors, but they, in my experience, model so many of the same like leadership personas that we see in executive spaces.
Mm,
This expectation that in order to be a good leader and to do your job well, you need to be a shark. You need to
mm,
be this ambitious, business savvy
mm,
person that has taken their own personal persona and completely tucked it away
mm,
and therefore is not sharing the vulnerable side of themselves. And so to use this example of these particular individuals in this piece of media, you still have the representation of different personalities in that room, right?
mm,
There in the original, I believe there were five investors, and some portrayed themselves. Now, whether this was written into the show or sincerely is them, I don't know. That's not for me to make that evaluation. But the different personas that were represented is you have individuals who are exclusively a shark.
mm,
Like if the deal doesn't go down the way they want and they don't, quote unquote win, then they say things like, this person is dead to me. Who are they? I've forgotten them already.
mm,
It is exclusively about the business. It is exclusively about the money.
mm,
It is that, laser focused, like shark mentality.
mhm,
Whereas you have and of course, this is just a part of like how, media and storytelling works. You have to have foils. You have to have different characters that play off of each other. And so you have other investors in this representation who do take a more heart-centered approach, like they're talking to the entrepreneur. Oh, I have a great deal of respect. Like, look, they came here and I recognize your struggle, and they would even offer parts of their own experience. My wife and I struggled with this, or like
mm,
my kid has experience with this as related to your product or your story or whatnot. And so they are sharing those vulnerable pieces of themselves, albeit relatively small,
mhm,
and through the lens of entertainment. But and this is why I feel like it's such an accessible way of looking at this is, yeah, in terms of business, you might want the shark like
mhm,
bringing in the money for
mhm,
you,
mhm.
but nobody likes working with that person because you're not working with a person. It's a persona. It
Yes.
is a it is a single function.
Mhm. Yeah. Yeah. And one where doing harm, even if it's just like micro harm, right? It's
Hmm.
considered part of the job description, but often the folks that are on the ground level could never get away with doing that kind of harm to others, especially if it's like up the ladder.
Hmm.
Yeah, I basically what we're talking about here, Caitlin, is like who is expected to mask and who doesn't have to mask. Who can get away with not doing any of that emotional labor of keeping that mask on.
Hmm. Exactly. And I love the note on emotion there too, because it's not just emotional labor, but it's how we represent ourselves. And case in point, for a lot of the prejudices around when it comes to conduct in the workplace, who is allowed to have an emotional response to something?
Mm, mm,
Because if if a man who is a vice president or a CEO or whatever, fill in the blank of like position of power, goes off on somebody in a meeting, oh well, they're just being assertive, they're
mm,
they're just sticking to business and what needs to be done.
mm, mm, mm. Yes, yes. Not bitchy or a nasty, it's
Hmm.
that's just they're just doing their job. I also want to call out myself a little bit too, Caitlin, like how the times when I didn't mask. So I think the other side of this conversation too, and I had this yesterday with an executive woman with ADHD, and it's like, I know this is unfair, But that was a situation in which I should have masked, even though I'd like to think that I didn't have to.
Mm.
And I've certainly gone through the ringer of that experience too, where I didn't understand the importance of masking. And I'm not defending it, but I'm just recognizing that if you are someone who, say, is neurodivergent or a person of color, a person with a different cultural background than the majority of people in power, a big part of your experience of whether it's leadership or just being in the workplace is the kind of heartbreaking times where it was like, oh, I was supposed to mask there. And because I didn't, I feel like I now have like potentially months and years of work to do to regain respect or to maybe make sure that I can keep my job, right? I also want
Hmm.
to call out that we're talking about masking because that's the term that I most relate to, but it also applies to things like code switching
Yes,
and how
absolutely.
if a person lets something slip in certain
Hmm.
situations and certain positions not of power, they could it could affect the longevity of their job. Whereas if someone in a position of power lets something slip, it could just be a roll the eyes. Oh, that's just so and so. That's how they are.
Hmm. Absolutely. And another thing that you're reminding me of, Lindy, is especially when it comes to leadership development,
Mm-hmm.
the how sometimes dismissive it can come across to give the advice or the feedback to somebody who is seeking mentorship to just speak up more. You know,
Yes.
you need to
Yes.
we need to hear from you more, and like
Yes.
that being like the primary entry point to visibility in the
Yes.
workplace,
Yes.
but at the same time not recognizing that all of the hoops that somebody in intersectional spaces or coming from different backgrounds would experience, there is more risk
Mm-hmm.
in being more visible and speaking out more, because to your point, if something slips, then it's not just the emotional reaction of I didn't mean to say that. Now there's more awareness about me personally than I'm comfortable with in the workplace. But as you were saying before, like potentially, looking down the line and seeing how much work do I need to do now in order to undo this or
Mm-hmm.
to, reestablish supposed credibility or anything like that. But yeah, it's frustrating, how oftentimes people in positions of leadership, like even when they are willing to be mentors,
Mm-hmm.
that they don't recognize the difficulties that their mentees are
Mm-hmm.
facing, and
Mm-hmm.
why, making yourself more visible is not an easy ask.
Yes. I'm getting chills hearing this, Caitlin, because I'm remembering a time in my career where I was involved in some like a committee in a place where the racial equity work was being done. And there is this moment where, we all kind of collectively agreed that there was a race problem at this place where we were working. And the ask was always, on the folks in lower positions. I don't like that terminology, but lower paid positions to speak up about racism. And finally, a woman of color in an executive position said, we cannot ask them to do that until the soil has been tended appropriately for it to be
Mm,
safe for them to do that.
mm-hmm,
And if the soil is not tended appropriately for safety, then we're not going to know what's going on because the people who are getting the worst of it are going to be too afraid to say anything for good reason, to your
mm-hmm,
point. And so I think that terminology really stuck with me. And my challenge to folks in leadership, if you have any kind of leadership title, ask yourself, is the soil tended? Is this a safe situation for folks to speak up? And if not, why not?
Hmm. Absolutely. And going back to one of the things we were talking about previously, it also, I think, has a big impact on the individual communications, right?
Mm-hmm.
Because we can have all kinds of messaging that comes throughout the company or the enterprise, but what leadership speaks to individually, I
Mm-hmm.
think, carries the most weight.
Mm-hmm.
And when we look at how we talk about these things, very much sets the tone for not only leadership but also, people on the front line as
Mm-hmm.
well. It's almost as if once, like as a leader, once you give permission to talk about different things, then, people on the front lines are enabled and empowered to, be honest about those things. Because I mean, as it seems a silly and an obvious thing to say, but like, yeah, it has to happen at leadership first because they set the precedent. And what is that phrase? Like, it's the worst behavior that leadership allows will set the bar
Mm-hmm.
for everyone else.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yes, absolutely. And I think leadership needs to look at where is this behavior allowed, right?
Hmm.
Because I think that the thought that came to mind for me was, insubordinates. Like I feel like there's an assumption that we're talking about subordinates, but there's also there's also this messaging that if you are under a certain level, you're not allowed to have any bad behavior, but if you're above a certain level, then have at it. You're protected, then yes, and that also sends a very clear message and sets very clear precedent. And I also want to say too, Caitlin, and I might have touched on this a little bit, like there have been times in my history, whether it was in leadership or just as an employee, where I probably should have been masking, right? Like for lack of a
Mm.
better word, like, or I didn't fully understand whether it was because of ADHD or just, not getting the culture necessarily or not reading the room right, where I said things or did things that were just not great for the workspace. I wasn't reading the room well, or I was oversharing or taking something not as seriously as I should have taken, right? Like, I have done those things. And I don't feel like I'm talking about like everyone should be able to behave poorly. That's not that's not the thing. Or everyone should be able to say bad jokes in the workplace, right? Because
Right,
it's
right.
it's it's more like everyone should be given the opportunity to learn their style in the workplace. And if it looks a little bit different, whether it's some people overshare and some people connect with folks through personal stories, and that they shouldn't feel like that's a bad thing, right? Or some people might talk a little bit more in meetings. Some people might not want to talk in meetings. And like, how can those meetings accommodate the different styles? Work appropriate, right? Like, there are some things that shouldn't come to work with you, but there shouldn't be one way of communicating or being in order to be heard.
Oh, absolutely. Absolutely. And to your point as well, like the let us not be misunderstood here. We are certainly not lowering the bar.
Yes. Yes.
But the idea is that we also hold ourselves to a higher standard
Mm-hmm.
because honestly, whether you want to be in a position of leadership or, be seen as a good person to have on the team. If you just want to be a good coworker and
Mm-hmm.
be able to, get through a shift feeling like a part of a team, again, like this comes back to a sense of belonging.
Mm-hmm.
And the thing that comes up so much in my research with innovation and the teams that feel comfortable enough
Mhm.
to genuinely offer their creativity as a part of their job is the safety to fail, the
Yes.
safety to make mistakes.
Yes.
And in the same way, if we approach these, if we're going to call them mistakes, as you were talking about going through the learning process of how you operate in the workplace, then we can all have take the time to better understand each other
Mhm.
because I feel like this aspect of leadership gets forgotten about or even just like deprioritized all the time. It's not just about understanding, how your team works so that you can, provide, the structure necessary. And even going back to what you're talking about with neurodivergent folks and how, we can best be leaders to, different styles, but understanding what everyone brings to the table because in those circumstances like what we might see as someone being really tone deaf and not reading the room, like this is still an opportunity to teach and learn.
Mhm. Mhm.
But if you don't have a mentor or leadership who is confident enough to address it kindly with someone, then
Yes.
that lesson won't be learned.
You read my mind, Caitlin. I'm thinking back to times did do when I was a new leader and making so many mistakes, so many mistakes. And I think back on the people who respected me enough to tell me I was making mistakes. Um,
Hmm.
and again, like I didn't know that I had, an ADHD diagnosis at the time. And so to me, I was like, this is just normal. This is how leadership works, right? And so it was helpful for people to respectfully, and these were both my leaders and also people that worked for me,
Hmm.
saying like, this is how I felt when this went down, or this is how that looked in that meeting, um, or this is what this is how your behavior affected people. So invaluable. And I
Hmm.
can imagine what it would have looked like if someone had said, oh, that's just Lyndie, she's a little neurospicy, we just let her. I like, how disrespectful would that have been? Like I would have been mortified to know that. Maybe in the moment it would have felt good because I would have felt like I was doing good leadership and not known how it was affecting other people. But because people held me to the standards of my potential, I was able to grow as a leader. When
Hmm.
people hold others to the standards of mediocrity, they
Hmm.
can't grow.
Absolutely. It makes me wonder, Lindy, and not to get too deep here, but it kind of, in a way, is starting to feel a little bit like something out of a DC comic, like feeling very Batman-esque. Like
Oh.
by so as a collective, because I don't want to imply that, we're like any one person or, organization is responsible for this because we're all responsible for the environments that we create.
Mhm.
But by making this kind of behavior permissible and taking it as an opportunity to dehumanize them,
Mhm.
are we making these sharks and these villains ourselves?
Ooh. Absolutely. Yes. By holding folks to the standards of mediocrity because of assumptions we have, yes. Again, not blaming the victim,
Hmm.
blaming the society that the victim is in, absolutely. Um, because of keeping in mind what we just talked about, that there are some folks who it's not safe to speak up.
Hmm.
Um, I also want to toot my own horn here for a second, and I'm realizing part of why I think people felt okay with bringing this to my attention was because I consistently told my team, please hold me accountable.
Hmm.
I asked them regularly, please tell me when I'm doing something wrong. So I had to give them permission consistently and over time and prove that it was safe to get the feedback. And I didn't always do it well. I'm not trying to say that I took feedback perfectly every time or like I always made everyone feel amazingly safe all the time. But I would repeat myself in that way as a way of like reminding myself and my team that it's okay to call me out. It's okay to call me out in a meeting, right? Like, yes, you can take me aside. That's how I will give you feedback. But it's also okay to show others that leadership requires a higher level of accountability than those in non leadership. So I think when a leader, whether it's intentional or not, makes it seem like feedback is not okay to give, whether it's something as simple as just having their door shut a lot or not having face to face time available, or something as overt as retaliatory behavior when someone does give feedback, then that's when masking has to happen. That's when mediocrity wins. And that's when workspaces feel unsafe.
Hmm. Absolutely. And because we are all fallible and vulnerable to mistakes, we're all just part of the learning process. And or excuse me, we're all going through the learning process. And one of my favorite Gaelic proverbs says, "We are to learn as long as we live.
Mm-hmm.
We never stop learning." And honestly, at the end of the day, if a person like whether it's in the workplace or, just as a person, ultimately, if you're shutting yourself off to not receiving any feedback and any help in that way from other people, your community, your peers, your mentors, then honestly, it's a huge disservice to yourself as well.
Mm-hmm.
And it's sad how crippling it can be.
And Caitlin, that's a great point that you just made that it's not just necessarily about feedback, it's about learning and growing. So it's sometimes it's simply the mentality that every person has something to teach me.
Hmm.
So it's not about catching me when I mess up or make a mistake. That's part of it, but it's about learning from everyone and that there's no arrival point where you need to stop learning.
Yes, absolutely. And I'm just gonna look up the name real quick to make sure that I get her name correctly. Becoming, if I can spell. Oh, I was so close. And one of my favorite lessons where I came across this concept that you're talking about, Lindy, like literally being able to learn from everyone, is a concept that I came across in Evie Pompuras's book, Becoming Bulletproof, in which she talks about ways to not only protect yourself, but just to live a more fulfilled life in paying attention to how you keep yourself safe, both physically, emotionally, and mentally. She talks about seeking a mentor is great because a good mentor is number one, hard to find,
Hmm.
and number two, can make a huge difference in your, professional and, personal goals.
Mm.
But when you consider every single person you meet as a mentor, whether they have a positive lesson to teach you, or if you're just learning, well, based on how they operate, I'm not going to operate that way.
Yes.
How not to act.
Yes. Yes.
Everyone is a mentor, and you've literally opened up your world
Mm.
to be a learning environment everywhere you go.
Mm. Mm.
Now, I would put a very small asterisk after that because as a as a girly who is recovering from spending just a little bit too much time in the self-development section of the bookstores,
Yes.
I will say that it is also a healthy perspective to, when you take time to rest, recognize that you don't have to be learning and growing in every single second of your life.
Mm. Mm.
It
Mm.
is a great goal
Mm.
to want to learn and grow and develop everything related to, your positive goals. However, I think it's really important to also pair this with a balance for an appreciation of who you are in this moment, all the work that
Mm.
you've done, all the strides that you've made, the ways that you've helped other people. Like there is still so much good to be had
Mm.
and appreciated there as well.
What I hear you say, Caitlin, is that it's wonderful to be in a space of always learning and always learning from everyone, but not coming at it from a place of lacking.
Mm-hmm.
So I'm thinking of part of the masking that people do is that whole like apologizing before they speak thing,
Mm-hmm.
which is often associated with women, not just women, but definitely I think people who don't have power in a room will apologize before they even start to say anything. And the message being sent is I am lacking and therefore I'm sorry to waste your time with what I'm about to say. And so you're exactly right, Caitlin. There's a balance there. Always be learning, but also protect and be aware of the times when you can rest, when you have something to offer, when you're the teacher,
Mm-hmm.
and recognizing that coming from a place of always learning doesn't mean that you're coming from a place of not knowing.
Right. Right. Because we don't know what we don't know.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah. Well, I think we've dropped some serious wisdom today.
Most definitely. And yeah, I think back to so many of those moments of shrinking in realizing, like, oh, I should have masked there, or I shouldn't have said that, or like clearly this part of me is not welcome in this space.
Mm-hmm.
And of course those are all very uncomfortable, but I'm still grateful to have had those experiences because I feel like at the very least they can inform my experience or my relationships moving forward in, approaching these situations with more empathy for those who not only have experienced the same, but also in speaking out more firmly in those moments when I have seen that, and calling out the mediocrity because I sincerely do believe that, every person wants to be better in their own way.
Mm-hmm.
We all want to be good people, I think. And, when we can do that together, I think, not to get too mushy, but But we really can, create better environments to be successful together.
Well said, to be successful together. Like, what if we collectively agreed to no longer hold some people to mediocre standards and other people to impossible standards of excellence at the same time?
Hmm.
No one is served by that. No one.
Hmm.
Even the people who are being held to mediocre standards, they're not gaining from that. I mean, yeah, maybe they are, but the messaging there is that we expect nothing more from you. We don't think you're capable. Um, yeah. So, what if we were to kind of recognize that holding people to the standards of their potential across the board, that was where the bar lies. I'd be
Hmm.
curious to know what that space would feel like.
Right. I respect you so much. I want you to grow too.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm,
Hmm.
mm-hmm. Yeah. Well, I hope when people listen to this, they can share stories of spaces where they've been held to appropriate standards or growth standards, or spaces when maybe that wasn't happening. I'd love to hear stories.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Or, even when that degree of mediocrity is glorified.
Mm,
Um, I will say that I feel like we're starting to come out of that
mhm,
kind of uh sleepy like dreamlike state of, just being part of the corporate machine and, just automatically affording like all of this respect and, praise to executives, CEOs, what have you.
mhm,
But yeah, I'm looking forward to seeing where it goes, especially as we raise those standards.
mhm, mhm. Exactly. Well, Caitlin, when you are not spending this wonderful time in the burnout break room, where can we find you?
You can usually find me by the coffee machine.
Same, same.
But also at CaitlinTruhella.com, as well as on most of social media like Instagram, TikTok, uh-huh. as let me start that over. As well as social media like such as Instagram and TikTok at Creative Caitlin. So for anyone who's looking for creative consulting or coaching, and even if your art specifically centers around writing, I do writer coaching as well and book editing, as well as ideation sessions. So you can find me there. And Lyndie, when you are not in this beautiful break room, where can people find you?
LyndieLarimore.com is a great place to start. I also have some social media, Instagram, LinkedIn, some Facebook. Yeah, I would love to see and hear from folks. It's been nice. We're starting to get more feedback about the podcast, which has been really great. Keep it coming, especially the nice feedback. That's our favorite, but we'll take all of it.
Oh, absolutely. And very much on brand for today too. We were talking about being leaders comfortable enough to receive feedback. We encourage that too. Like
Exactly.
we're gonna talk the talk and walk the walk as well. So
Hmm.
yeah, if there's we appreciate feedback on the podcast.
Hmm. Absolutely. Well, thank you, Caitlin, and I look forward to seeing you next time.
Until next time, thanks, Lindy.